Is the president of Egypt scared of the competition? Sami Anan is the latest contender forced out of the race for the presidential election in March. The army's former chief of staff is under arrest. And a former prime minister has also been forced to drop out. This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It doesn't look like many, or should that be any, challengers are going to make it to polling day for the presidential election in Egypt. Voting in March will be the second since Abdel Fatteh el Sisi deposed President Mohammed Morsi 5 years ago. Critics say the election is turning into a farce. One military leader seen as a leading contender to replace Sisi is out of the race. Sami Anan was arrested by soldiers on Tuesday. Army commanders say the former army chief of staff broke the law by not getting permission to declare his candidacy. Anan's spokesman says his arrest means the state doesn't really want elections at all. Well, another candidate out of the running is Ahmed Shafiq. The former Prime Minister and Air Force chief announced his challenge in November, but withdrew earlier this month. He said he'd reconsidered and didn't think he was the best person to run the country. The nephew of late President Anwar, al-Sadat, is also out. He's refused to run, blaming what he called an environment of fear surrounding the election. Well, it's a far cry from the Egyptian revolution 7 years ago. Then the streets of Cairo were filled with hopes for change and democracy. Millions protested against poverty, unemployment and corruption. President Hosni Mubarak was overthrown after nearly 30 years in power. His replacement in June 2012 was Egypt's first democratically elected president, Mohammed Morsi. But he was deposed just past his first year in the job as the army again demonstrated its power. More protests followed and Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood supporters were banned. The crackdown which followed saw hundreds killed, thousands arrested and Morsi sentenced to death. The last presidential election was in 2014. Former Army General Abdel Fatteh el Sisi won 97% of the vote. Well, let's bring in our guests now. And joining us from Egypt's capital, Cairo, is Timothy Caldas. He's a non-resident fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. In Berlin, we have Ahmed Badawi, a senior researcher with the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Politics with Free University of Berlin. He's also the author of the book, The Political Economy of Egypt Under Sisi. And finally, Dr. Tawfiq Hamid, political analyst and author who specialises in Egypt's domestic policy. A very warm welcome to all of you. Tawfiq, if I could start with you, why was Sami Anan arrested?
I believe it is clear that he broke the rules and regulations of the Egyptian military. And as many knows, in military systems all over the world, the rules and regulations are usually and typically very strict. So anyone who will break it will have the same consequence, like Mr. Ahmed Qunsuwa, for example, he was in the military and he did the same and he was in trouble. So I think the blame him comes to Mr. Anan, why he didn't take the permission first. So I see there is no other reason.
Okay.
Maybe there might be other minor things, but that is the major
Sure, but does it not set off alarm bells for you? I mean, this is another strong contender disqualified from the race.
It doesn't sound normal because this is uncommon situation, but in both situations, the same process happened. Someone from the military breaking the rules, for example, and he is punished by the rules of the military itself. But I think this point may be valid, that there is trouble if Mr. Hisham Gunena, for example, or Dr. Hazim Hosni, who are with Mr. Anan in the group of who put themselves up for the Egyptian people to choose a president who was Anan, if one of them applied with his name as a civilian and then a problem happened to him, then we can say there is intentional a desire to stop any candidate. But we have seen Khalid Ali competing, and Mr. Anan is out not because he competed, but because he broke the basic rules of the military in this situation.
Timothy, do you agree with that? Is he out because he's broken the rules?
I believe that's what the government would like to say. Look, I think the reality is that to say there were other minor issues about why Anan was not allowed to run is to really to be very disingenuous about the situation. Ahmed Shafiq had already previously run for president, and he was held for a month in a hotel until he decided that he was no longer well suited to run, until he made that concession to the government. With respect to Khalid Ali, he's complained about harassment of his campaign and of people trying to register and not being allowed to endorse his candidacy. And the nephew of former President Anwar al-Sadat has also complained about the undemocratic environment that he was having to deal with. The reality is that candidates, regardless of whether or not they're in the military formally or not, have not been able to run unimpeded in this election. And it's quite clear that this government is not terribly interested in allowing that to happen. Beyond that, it's not clear that Anan would have been allowed to get the permission that Mr. Tawfi is describing. And he did, in his statement, say that he was waiting and for his nomination to go forward pending the approval of the military. He acknowledged the regulations. He didn't say that they were unjust or unfair. He was waiting for the military to give him the permission as the law does prescribe.
Okay. Ahmed, given that Sami Anan would have known the risks of breaking the rules of running for presidency without ticking all the boxes, why did he even dare to do so?
Well, we have to be clear that technically speaking, Anan did not break any rules. He did not nominate himself. In fact, the time for the official nominations is not even open yet. What he did was that he declared his intention to run once he got all the necessary permissions from the military. So saying that he broke the rules, technically and legally speaking, this is incorrect. He did not break any rules. Of course, he was aware of the risks, and this leads me to another problem, and it's really very difficult to discuss it. It's more, it's like a black box, which is basically the splits within the military. It could be the case that Anan was hoping that he could count on some kind of support from within the military establishment. We shouldn't forget that a few days ago, President Sisi removed the head of General Intelligence, which was widely viewed as a main competitor to the military intelligence from which Sisi hailed. So it could be the case that Anan was counting on some kind of support, either from General Intelligence or from other centers or blocks inside the army. But apparently the regime was faster and managed to take out this kind of potential support and basically left Anan out in the cold on his own.
Tawfiq, is that something that you can believe? Because we're seeing now two former military men putting their candidacies forward, suggesting that they do have military backing.
No, I see in theory this can be right, but the reality is that we have not seen any division within the military. I have not seen a single unit in the military going to support Anan, for example, or a group of people who works in the military who declared that they are fully behind Anan, or Mr. Ahmed Qunsuwa, for example. So I think in theory anything is possible, but the reality on ground is clearly showing that they don't have really that level of support they would expect. Maybe they expected they would have, but they didn't. If they had, we would have seen even small example or samples of support coming from here and there within the military, but this never happened.
Okay. Timothy, how scared perhaps is Sisi of facing a candidate with a military background?
Well, I don't think that there's any fear on the part of Sisi in terms of losing an election. They are sufficiently in control of the situation to prevent that, and they're even in control of the situation, it appears, to prevent the candidacy of anyone else, for that matter. I think that the concern with Anan or with Shafiq was that sustained criticism for months during a campaign of Sisi, and Anan also indicated that he was going to criticize the outsized role of the military in politics and perhaps even the economy. As he indicated in his statement when he was announcing his intention to run. These sorts of things could affect the credibility and the popularity of Sisi and the military more broadly, and could do some damage. But the reality is that the regime has consolidated power quite effectively, and we saw that with how decisively and they responded to Anan's announcement. I mean, within 72 hours, he was arrested. So I think suspicions that there's a lot of division in the military are probably more wishful thinking than reality. And while there may be some, of course, that, I mean, any political system is more complex than a unified voice. They're clearly not enough to facilitate any serious challenge to Sisi.
Okay, let's take a look at who is still in the race. Ahmed, we've got Khalid Ali. I think you mentioned him before. He's a leftist lawyer. And we've got Murtada Mansour, right-wing MP, who is still trying to drum up the support to get the nominations. Do you see these two men staying in the race to the end, till March?
Well, it's not clear. Murtada Mansour is... I don't take him seriously as a contender. Khalid Ali is a different story. Khalid Ali and his campaign, they say that they intend to remain in the race until the end, but there is a court case against Khalid Ali, and the verdict is due 2 weeks before the elections. He's accused of making an indecent gesture in public. If there is a verdict against him, then automatically he will be disqualified from running. Until now, it seems that remaining in the race, as far as Khalid Ali is concerned, is actually is good for Khalid Ali. Is definitely good for the regime. It would seem odd that Sisi would run unopposed in the elections. So I suspect that Khalid Ali will continue to run until the end. There is a very little chance, of course, that he would win, but at least he would give the appearance that there has been a real electoral competition.
Would you agree with that, Tawfiq, that Sisi needs to keep some people in the race to legitimize the vote?
The presence of some people in the race is important because it gives the impression that there is some form of choice. But I don't think el-Sisi will do it intentionally. There are people who wants to join, and as I mentioned earlier, Judge Hisham Janina or Dr. Hazem Hosni, who were with Sami Anan when as the main people beside him, why not one of them go forward and put his name for the elections, for example? So I think el-Sisi would like to see a competition. In my opinion, he would like to see a competition because he knows at the street level and ordinary people, many of them really are supporters. And the main factor, in my view, that will be really worrying for el-Sisi is if his supporters went to the ballot or not, because there are many people who are relatively passive. They may show support or have support for someone, but they don't go to do the effort to go to the election ballot. While the competitors of el-Sisi are much more organized as groups. If they are dedicated to behind someone, they will go in masses behind him. So I think the main challenge in the next stage is to see the supporters of el-Sisi going to the streets, to the ballot to put their vote. And this is what he asked them to do. He knows that he will get the majority if they went to the ballot box.
Okay, I think that's true, isn't it? A key indicator of support for Sisi will be turnout in this election. The last one in 2014 was 47%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Timothy, what's the mood on the street? Is there much excitement for this vote in March?
No, I don't think anyone's really... I don't think a lot of people are terribly interested. I mean, the outcome is already known. And I would agree with Tawfiq that the challenge for Sisi is to have a remotely credible turnout, given that everybody already knows the results, and there isn't really much incentive to bother voting, given that reality. The removal of so many of the candidates from the race only further discourages participation as it becomes more transparent what a sham the whole process is. Khalid Ali's campaign says that they're going to hold a press conference later today to determine whether or not they will continue in the race, given what's happened with Anan. So they aren't fully decided on that. I think that the dilemma for them is, while on one level, yes, increasing turnout helps Sisi, and having another person in the race helps Sisi, but at the same time, to what extent it's possible, they'd like to exploit a little public space has to be made available for this campaign to happen. And it gives them an opportunity to criticize the president, criticize the political situation in a way that they're rarely offered, given the amount of repression that we've seen in the last few years. So they're kind of struggling to balance those different variables to make the decision about what is best for the opposition and for the democracy movement in Egypt at large.
Okay, I mean, Ahmed Sisi came to power, didn't he, with two key goals. Let's take a little look at his record. He wanted to improve the economy and he wanted to make Egypt more secure. How does he score on those fronts?
I think he scores badly. On the one hand, he initiated some necessary reforms, but the timing of these reforms and the sequencing of them have left many Egyptians feeling the hardship of high prices, soaring inflation, and lack of economic opportunities. On the other hand, many Egyptians are having grievances regarding the way Sisi, for example, has dealt with the issue of Tiran and Sanafir, two Red Sea islands that he handed over to Saudi Arabia, thus relinquishing Egyptian sovereignty over them. I think this was a turning point in terms of the level of support for him. Also, he doesn't seem to be very successful in managing the conflict with Ethiopia over the dam that the Ethiopians are building, which many Egyptians fear is going to reduce the share of the Nile water that Egypt receives. On the whole, yes, he managed to bring back a sense of security in the street, but again, here it's not a clear story of success. We still see serious attacks against the military, in particular in Sinai. The security situation there is really very precarious. And we've also seen a lot of terrorist attacks on the mainland, especially against Copts. He managed to achieve this security through an incredible level of oppression. Thousands are perishing in prison. It's also not clear how there can be security and sustainable sense of security in Egypt when right now it seems that any chance of a peaceful transition into democracy or a peaceful rotation of power, this is somehow not going to happen anytime soon. So opening the door to any chance of peaceful transition of power, this in itself is a very worrying factor and might reduce the level of security in the country on the long run.
Tawfiq, when you hear that record, I mean, it's not a particularly good one. He's got declining support in the country. Isn't that really why he's so against having any serious challenger in this election?
As I mentioned, I don't see him against having people challenging him. There are already some people, and if Anan did it correctly by putting some civilian like Hisham Genena or Hazem Hosni instead of him, the problem we wouldn't have seen this problem. But I think al-Sisi credibility came from the feel of security that many Egyptians are talking about it. A few years ago, they were really in trouble. Now, many Egyptians feel more secure. And also, I think the pain of changing the plans for the subsidies for electricity and for gas has affected many people. But there are many people also can understand this is a crucial step towards supporting the more poor people instead of giving more subsidy to the wealthy who are using more electricity and more gas. So I think the situation is, I can't say it's everything is perfect, but I can say Egyptians understand that many of the problems that they live in it are not the outcome of al-Sisi presidency. In fact, it was a cumulative problems coming from Nasser time to President Sadat to Mubarak, and then al-Sisi carries all the burden. So he is now trying to solve the problems, and he doesn't have a magic wand to just change change things in day and night. It will take time, but I think many believes it is in the right direction.
Timothy, just to get your response to that, the Egyptians generally believe that the country is moving in the right direction, that Sisi is a solver of problems. Are they willing to forgive all the tough austerity measures that have been put in place?
I think this is really a mixed bag here. So, I mean, undoubtedly, the population is suffering under the economic conditions that Ahmed outlined, with the high rates of inflation. Subsidy reduction obviously is increasing costs for people, not only for energy, but also for the knock-on effect of inflation that adds to the equation. There are people who do, as Ahmed pointed out, accept that this difficulty is part of a long-term strategy that may be necessary. But I mean, Hamid's point on the reduction of energy subsidies in the hope to increase support for the poor is theoretically correct, but in practice has been quite limited in terms of how it's been rolled out. The Takaful al-Karama program that is part of the government's effort to give cash to those most needy in the country is only affecting is about affecting 1.5 million families. And the reality is that nearly 30 million people are officially below the poverty line in Egypt. And so getting the assistance necessary to so many of the people who are being affected negatively by these policies is a challenge the government has not been able to overcome. And so the subsidies are being removed now, and the aid that they were hoping to get is perhaps years away. And so a lot of people are falling through the cracks, and that has led to a lot of frustration and a lot of people having negative feelings towards Sisi and the government more broadly. So some people accept that the challenges are not his fault and that these policies have to be taken. Others question the priorities of the government when they see mega projects and glittery receptions and the World Youth Forum and all these other events and all this money being spent on things that frankly don't help them. They begin to question the priorities of the government and their right to do so.
Ahmed, how's the rest of the world seeing the situation? Are they happy to let Sisi get on with it and win another election, another 4 years in power?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, until now, we see that the rest of the world seems to be accepting the status quo in Egypt and accepting Sisi as a president and accepting his regime. Initially, we've seen some criticism of the military coup, but very quickly we've seen this changing. Right now, the mantra in the world community is stability, stability, stability. And as long as they believe that Sisi is ensuring stability, then I think the United States and major European powers will be keen on supporting him. The question is this going to be sustainable? As long as the Sisi regime is providing vital services to the international community in terms of this fight against terrorism, in terms of preventing more waves of migrants crossing the Mediterranean to Europe, then I think there will be agreement that he's fine as long as he's ensuring this stability and as long as he continues to provide these services to the international community.
OK. Tawfiq, just in the last minute that we have, we're doing the show 7 years after the uprisings that ousted Hosni Mubarak. Is Egypt not back right where it started?
No, I think it's in a better direction. I think even though there are challenges, a lot of challenges that are happening as a sequel of the revolutions and for many other reasons, but the direction, I believe, is better than it was during Mubarak. I believe the direction is better and the fruit will come, but it will take some time to see this fruit happening.
OK, there we must leave our discussion today. Many thanks to all our guests for joining us here on Inside Story. Timothy Koldis, Ahmed Badawi and Tawfiq Hamad. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.